Hello, Freedom Finders, and welcome to episode 22 of Teach Me Freedom, and another episode in our season 3, Marriage and Motherhood/Parenthood, Are They For Me? And in this episode, we'll be having a conversation/interview with the author of the book, Lessons from the End of a Marriage: How I Found Happiness While Surviving Bigamy, Abandonment, and Deceit. We'll be speaking with the lovely and incredibly strong author Lisa Arends. When preparing for this season, one of the topics I felt it would be important to explore is that of divorce, because we have such high statistics related to divorce, and because I understand that divorce is something that many people fear, both people who have been married and people who've not been married. And it was such a touching and revealing experience to read Lisa's book, where she took us through an experience that she went through, which was quite unbelievable. And so I'm super excited that she was willing to be on the show and be so open with us. In addition to tuning in to the episode, I strongly encourage you to check out Lisa Arends' book. It's a powerful read, and it really gives more depth to the conversation that we had in this episode. Hello, this is Alisia Young, and welcome to Teach Me Freedom. This podcast is about learning how to live a freer life from authors, entrepreneurs, and experts. Those who have done it and who teach others how to do it as well, and what it feels like while applying those methods to our lives along the way. Every episode will deliver resources, anecdotes, and/or reviews to support you in living a more freedom-filled life. Let's jump in. Please note the video version of this episode is available on YouTube at Teach Me Freedom. The link is also mentioned in the show notes. Enjoy. Welcome, Lisa Arends, to the show. So excited to have you here. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so happy to be here.
My absolute pleasure, and I'm so excited for our listeners to hear from you. And Lisa, please begin by telling us about your book, along with why you wanted to write it and who it's for.
Sure. So I never, ever saw myself writing a book. That was never in the life plans. In fact, I was working as a math teacher. And at that point, I had been with my then husband for 16 years. And then suddenly, out of the blue, I received a text message that said, "I am sorry to be such a coward leaving you this way, but I am leaving you and leaving the state." And I literally never spoke with him again. And at the moment I received the text, I collapsed onto the floor, as you can imagine. And one of the very first things I said, I was with my father at the time, and I looked up at him and I said, "I am going to find a way to make something good come out of this. I don't know how, I don't know when, but I need to do that." And that was like literally one of the first things that came to mind. And table that then for a couple of years. Then I went through a couple of years of dealing with all of the aftermath, figuring out what was going on, getting my life back functional. But during that time, I started to journal just for my own personal healing and processing. But I also, as I was dealing with attorneys and dealing with law enforcement, long story, they all kept being shocked at my story and saying, "Oh my goodness, this needs to be a book." And so that sort of planted that seed of like, oh, this is different. Like there's something here that might be a story. And so then about 2 years after the divorce finally, or after he left, is when I started taking some of those journal entries and turning that into a book. And the book I see kind of for a few different audiences. On the one hand, it's kind of a lifetime movie sort of story, if that's what you're interested in. It definitely has that element to it. But it's also for people that are going through any kind of life transition that is sudden and that is unwanted, where you're feeling out of control. And I called the book Lessons from the End of a Marriage because it's really all of those lessons that I learned really about myself and about how to go through this kind of process as I was going through this.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Lisa. And really, as I as I was sharing with Lisa when we first jumped on the call together, all I can say is wow, like it's incredible. And Lisa, you're a testament to that as well, of the amazing power that one can have through sharing their experience and putting it in a book and reaching people worldwide. Like we're in different countries, and reading your book, I cried as if it was I was going through, like, you pulled us in, like I felt like it was me. And I cried, I laughed at some of your comments, but I just couldn't believe that, as you were saying, when you were meeting with those professionals, like, is this really real? Like, was this really
Right.
happening?
Yeah.
I don't want to give too many spoiler alerts. I really wanted to pull from some of the major topics that I felt Lisa discussed in her book. And so let's jump into the first one. Common feelings and common ideas associated with divorce is sense of failure.
Mhm.
And would like to know more about what that experience was like for you, dealing with that. We'll just say that topic, but in connection with divorce.
Sure. There absolutely is such a sense of shame that can come with divorce. And I remember it was very early on. And one of my coworkers actually said to me, well, I would never get divorced because me and my husband, we're going to work it out no matter what. And at that point, I had to leave the room because I was completely devastated because I was never given that choice. And so it made me feel like I was being judged, like that somehow I threw in the towel too easily, that I gave up too easily because I my marriage did end in divorce. But I don't think, from my perspective now, this has been many years, and I don't think that seeing divorce as a failure makes any sense. Think about, like, a beloved pet. You don't say, oh, he was such a great dog. It's too bad that he died at 10. That means he was a failure because his life ended early. We don't say that. No, we celebrate the 10 years that we did have with that animal. And I think maybe we can look at marriage in kind of that same way. Some of them go the distance, and some of those are good marriages, some of them aren't. Some of them end prematurely, if you want to think of it that way. And even when they do, there probably were some good years there. And so we can celebrate the good years that were there and also recognize that it was time, for whatever reason, for it to come to an end.
Yeah, I definitely love how you framed it, in that it can be a matter of perspective, and it's not necessarily black and white of it was all good or it was all bad.
Yeah. I think that was one of the biggest at the beginning when all of this happened to me. I really saw so many things as black and white. And, these binary, things. And over the years, as I've really worked through all of this, I don't see many things that way anymore. Everything now is so muddied and so gray, and it's complex, yes, but it's also life, and it's beautiful, and there's beauty in that, those imperfections, and in all that nuance. I think
Mhm.
that's it's amazing to see those.
Mhm. Yeah, that sounds like a very, like, broadened way to look at life and just look at life situations and just life overall.
It is, it's life overall.
And you had mentioned that that experience of somebody making a comment, colleague making a comment, that if this were in an ideal situation of choosing to never divorce, and how, it did impact you, even though it wasn't said directly to you, that feeling of being judged, and especially because you didn't have a say, you couldn't put up a fight in that way. So what would you give as advice for people for being supportive, or more understanding of divorce since it does happen?
I think a lot of it is being aware of your own fears, because I think what happens is we are so afraid of our own relationships ending in divorce or our own partners betraying us or whatever that is, that we respond with those fears to people instead of just meeting that person where they are and really being open and willing to listen. And that's hard to do. I mean, it takes courage to be able to really look at that in yourself, and it takes some self-awareness, but it is so powerful when we can recognize those fears within ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I totally
Well, and
agree.
and I think too, ask questions. Don't assume that you know kind of where they're coming from and what their situation is. That was one thing that I really experienced is a lot of people heard divorce and they kind of assigned, okay, here's like the stereotypical divorce. They just applied all of that to my situation and it didn't fit. And so there was a lot of frustration that I had because of that, and that was coming not only from friends and family but from professionals. And that was really hard to deal with. Instead of them just asking and kind of starting with that blank slate and then filling in the pieces, they kind of started with this template, and then I was like, no, that's not right.
Hmm. Yeah, so important. So important. You're really emphasizing that importance of not making assumptions and getting the full picture.
Yeah, definitely.
And there are some other questions I have more about the different emotions
Yeah.
and things that need to be repaired when going through that process, but would really like to know how you are now and where you are at now after having gone through that experience and going through, publishing your book and sharing it with the world and helping people as they navigate divorce as well and being able to thrive after divorce.
It's night and day. Okay, here's one. I just said I don't think in black and white anymore, but I just went there. But it really is. So it's been 12 years now. And in that time, oh my goodness. So not only did I write the book, but I've had a blog going, a YouTube page, all of that, all around the same thing. And being able to help others has been so incredible because when all this happened to me, I felt so alone. And one of the things that I pledged is I never wanted anybody else going through something similar to feel alone. And I really believe that I've been able to give that to people, to be able to let them feel heard, to give them a voice, and to to be somebody who understands what they're going through. So that has been so amazing, and never expected anything like that to come. I mean, I said I wanted to make something good come of it. I never imagined it would be this big, I guess.
Mhm.
Um, and then personally, oh my goodness. So I've been remarried now for 8 years. We just had our 8-year anniversary. And
Congratulations.
thank you. And it's one of those things that's amazing. Like, I thought I had a good marriage with my ex-husband. I really did. I mean, we never fought, everything. We were like the couple everybody looked up to, whatever.
Mhm.
My marriage now is so much deeper. It's more authentic. It challenges me more, which is a good thing. We support each other in growing, which I think is so important. I think my first marriage, it's kind of like it was this static thing almost. And my marriage now is constantly evolving and growing as we grow and change, which I think it's just amazing. So I am in a completely different place than where I was back at that point.
Yeah. Oh, that's so encouraging to hear, and congratulations again
Thank
on
you.
getting to that place of being able to start a new partnership and continue to grow and support each other, even amongst the that low that you went through. You came out the other side and are helping other people, and but also having that belief and faith and working at it to start something new and different.
It's never too late.
Isla, that is very, very encouraging. I'm so glad that you said that because I don't want to say like that I hear from a lot of people. It's just there's several people in my life who have gone through divorce and that like it's just and I haven't experienced it myself. So that was partly why I wanted to read your book as well to understand how I can be supportive of them, but also understand like for my relationships as well. And that's a fear that I've heard people say is, I'm in my late 30s, like, or I want to have children, or I want to have children. And just this whole fear of it's not even worth it to get back into it. I don't know how to date anymore. All these reasons to just not even try again.
And all of that is the fear kicking up. It's the fear of saying, if I try again, if I put myself out there again, I'm going to be hurt again.
Mhm.
And oh, do I get that? I had all those excuses and so many more kicking up. But it's one of those where you can make the decision not to put yourself out there again. And in doing so, you know that you're living a limited life.
Mhm.
And by putting yourself out there again, I don't mean that doesn't mean you have to be in like a romantic partner relationship. But I mean putting yourself out there again where you're willing to be vulnerable with people, where you're willing to have an intimate, emotionally intimate connection with somebody, where you're willing to be seen. Those things are so important for a rich life. And if we try to protect ourselves too much, okay, so then we avoid one kind of pain, but we're guaranteeing ourselves a different kind of pain.
That makes sense. And hopefully that will get through to people of who are feeling kind of stuck in that fear of not wanting to move forward because it's like paralyzing, or it's like that preference of, okay, I'm just going to stay over here instead of taking that leap and taking those steps.
And I get it. I really empathize even more so now with like my readers and everything that are in that situation where they're making the decision to leave a marriage, one that is not great but is, okay, because with my marriage, I never had that choice. I was kind of thrown out of the window. But I just recently went through a career change, or actually I'm kind of in the middle of it. And I left a career where I was successful, where I had a guaranteed future, been there for 20 years, and I could have kept going there, but it wasn't fulfilling. It wasn't right anymore. And at 44, I took that leap of, okay, I'm leaving that and I'm doing something new. And it's
Right.
completely terrifying. And you're always kind of questioning yourself of like, should I have just stayed with the it's okay? Or is this risk of, oh, but it could be better? I
Mhm.
can really be myself. I have this opportunity to grow. And I think that's always the case when we have those transitional periods in our life when we're leaving the known and leaping into that unknown. It's just a
Mhm.
hard place to be.
Yes. That uncertainty, yes, for sure.
Yes, we want to know how it ends. It's
Yes.
like we want to
Yes.
see the end of the bridge before we take that first step.
Exactly, just having that guarantee.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
haven't found them yet. Yeah, life has no like extended warranty, so yeah, you do with it what you can.
Yes. And thank you as well for mentioning that point of your transition as well, because that's something that we talk about on the podcast actually.
Mhm.
As we're recording this episode together, we're currently in the season for the careers section.
Oh, cool.
I'm talking about transition, all that stuff. So it's really cool to hear you share that theme of transition in relationships, but also transition in career. And that actually leads to a question of, you mentioned that you were at the height of your career and then you switched
Mhm.
into a different career. And then even like after a relationship ending, taking that step to go into a new or those steps to eventually go
Mhm.
into a new relationship if that's where it led. And I know that you said like part of it is about just kind of facing the fear and not letting it hold you back. But what were some things that you did? Like, were there any, and I know that you shared journaling, for example, but
Mhm.
was there anything else that you did to help you with those decisions to take those leaps and to help you be like, okay, I'm going to choose to go as opposed to not go?
Good question. Oh my goodness, I did a lot. Okay, so definitely did the journaling. And one of the things that I did in the journaling is every day I made myself write. I called it like a journal in three parts. And so the first part is, oh, and let me back up. Every time I wrote in it, I forced myself to go in order. Okay. So the first part was just the yuck. It was just all of that pain and anger and hurt and all of that. It was just getting that out on the page. And it's funny because if I look back at that journal, so like my pen would cut through like 10 pages on that because I was so angry at points. So that was phase one. But I wouldn't let myself stop there because yes, you need to get those things out, but I didn't want to stay in that space. I didn't want to, feed that mental space. So then I would get moved to the second part. And the second part was kind of the problem solving area where I had to kind of think about, okay, present day, what's something tangible that I can do? Just anything. So kind of that processing and just a little bit of kind of action. And then the third part was the hope. The third part was shut the fears up, put them away. What do I want? What might the future look like? What could this be? And I allowed myself to go big there. And so I would always go in that order. And so I would always end on that hope place, which I really think it helped to train my brain because throughout the day, when I mentally would get into those negative spaces, my brain would naturally kind of go, okay, but now let's problem solve. Okay, now let's think about what's possible. And that really, really helped. One of the other things that I did was a ton of exercise. And it sounds so silly in some ways, but it's one of those that, like, if I exhausted my body, there just wasn't as much space anymore to be anxious and to be afraid and to be worried. And so I would go for these insane long runs until I just couldn't like function anymore. But then it was like, okay, I'm at peace at this point. And then one other thing that I did is I set 12 goals for myself. And they were goals for that first year. And some of them were so tiny. I remember one of them was learn to cook one gluten-free meal. That was one of 12 goals. In a year. Like that's so tiny. Make one new friend, They were just these itty bitty things. But other ones were big, like go on a date, which was scary as could be because okay, this sounds horrible, but I had never dated men because the last time I was dating boys because it was in high school. So it was like, oh my goodness, but I need to do it. And as much as I could, I tried to capitalize on excitement around all of those scary things instead of fear. Because the way I saw it is I'd already been through kind of the worst. Like that was the worst thing I could have ever imagined happening was losing my then husband. Face that, was still breathing. Everything else was kind of gravy. I was like, if I survive that, I can do whatever.
Yeah, that sounds like it puts it into perspective. And I love how you have that like 3-step process so that you're very like, I love how you said that because I've often heard of journaling is mainly to channel your emotions. For a lot of times, if it's related to eating disorders, a lot of that of like just get it out so that you're not keeping that within you and then
Right.
like trying to discharge that energy in a different way. And then the 12 goals, I love that. 12 goals, and they don't have to be massive, but just important to you.
I think that's something that's really important too, just for everybody going through transition, is make your goals tiny. Other than the ones I wrote down, I remember for the first 2 weeks, my goal was literally to try to eat. Are you ready for this? Because I wasn't eating. My body just completely shut down. My goal was to eat one frozen waffle. That was it. Like that was my goal. And it took me 2 weeks to be able to eat a waffle, but I did it. And you better believe like I had a little party for myself. I was like, I did it. Because I think we get so overwhelmed when we look at these like huge goals that we want. If I had thought, 12 years ago, okay, I want to be happy, I want to get my finances back in order, and I want to be in a new relationship. Oh my goodness, I would have still been like in a fetal position on the floor because that's just too much.
Yeah.
But if I thought, okay, I need to be able to eat one waffle, I could do that.
Yeah, I love that. It speaks to baby steps, and
Oh yeah.
have your success, and revel in it, and then keep pushing forward from
Yes.
there.
And also mark your progress. I think we can
Mm,
forget to do that because when we're still in it, we don't recognize how far we've come sometimes.
yeah.
And so sometimes you need to go back, whether that be looking in your journal or whatever it is, go back and look at, oh, even though I'm not where I want to be, I am a long way from where I started.
Definitely. Yeah, that's gold advice right there. Absolutely. Some of the like topics or themes that came to mind. I'm just going to say a group of words going through your marriage experience along with your divorce experience and now your changed life after that, how you would relate to these terms. Rebuilding
Rebuilding
trust.
trust.
How did you go about that after
Woo.
that experience?
Okay. First, rebuilding trust, like that just literally gives me goosebumps still,
Hey.
because that was one of the biggest emotional hurdles for me of the entire thing. What it really, really comes down to is learning to trust yourself. Because in the beginning, I was really, really hard on myself looking because I was blind in my first marriage. There was a lot of things that were going on that I didn't see. Now, in my defense, I wasn't supposed to see them. And my then husband was working very hard to keep me from seeing them, but still, I was blind. So afterwards, one of my biggest fears was, how do I know that I'm not going to end up in that same place again? And so much of it came down to trusting my own perspectives, trusting my gut,
Yeah.
and then also trusting that I would be okay no matter what happens. So trusting that I can take in those difficult truths, whatever they might be, even if it's something I don't want to be true, and that I can be okay in spite of that. And
Mhm.
that was a really, really, really big piece. It also, of course, is the trusting another person.
Mhm.
And one of the biggest things I did there was very deliberate in who I chose to be in a relationship with again. My now husband is extremely courageous and doesn't hide things. He doesn't shy away from those difficult conversations.
Mhm.
And I like that because that gives me something then that I can trust because he's not the kind of person to try to sweep it under the rug. So it's kind of the two pieces of it there of he's somebody that has proven trustworthy and just his character traits lend themselves to being open about things. And then I trust myself to be willing to see things and also to change my responses to things because in my first marriage, because I didn't want to see things, I would overreact sometimes because I would panic. And so I've really had to be like, no, you're going to be okay. And so I don't overreact in the same way anymore, which then gives the space for the other person to be open. It says it's safe to be open because I'm not going to react too strongly. So
Mhm.
trust is a big piece, and I think so often, especially like after you've been betrayed, you think that trust comes down to the other person, like having access to their phone or knowing where they are at all times.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not trust. Like that to me, they're kind of two separate things. That's more control. And no
Mm.
matter what you do on that, you're never going to know everything. Like if you're stuck on those things, it's never ever going to be enough because unless it's like during a COVID lockdown where you're in the same room and there's no power, so they're not on a device, you don't know exactly what they're doing every moment of every day, nor can you, nor really should you. You need to be living your own life.
Yes.
Trust comes down to believing that you're going to be okay. Also, believing that there's room for imperfection, I think, and giving space for that. I think we need to give space in our relationships to, for somebody to say, I messed up, and to have a conversation about that, and to have that conversation early, not months, years down the road when these bad decisions have compounded upon each other.
Yeah.
But to be able to say, I screwed up. I want to work on this. I want to come together with it. No, that was a long answer.
It was perfect. It was perfect. I was like, wow, yeah, yeah. Trusting, learning to trust yourself, you're connecting with your intuition, your gut, and then being able to see, but also trusting that other person or other people. And there was something else that you said that I was like, okay, yes, yeah, that was like eureka. When you differentiated between trust versus control, and just that idea that there's always you're always going to be doing something, like, not to say anything suspicious, but
Right.
we can't have that full control and that, yeah, and
It's
that
an
in our
illusion.
lives.
It's an illusion, is all it is.
Mhm.
And on the one hand, it makes you feel better because you feel like you know what they're doing. But on the other hand, it makes you feel worse because you're always having to be on guard and looking. And
Yes.
I think that there's a balance. Like, so when I said in my first marriage, I was blind. Okay. I'm not that anymore. But I'm also not like on that, like, I'm not on a search team always looking for things either.
Yeah.
But my eyes are open. So there's a balance between the two. Like, blind isn't good, nor is always looking for something good. You want to be right in the middle where you're aware of things. And then going back to like the listening to your gut, you've got to give your gut space to speak, which I know sounds a little weird, but we're so busy in our lives and we allow ourselves to be distracted so easily, especially from uncomfortable emotions, that
Mm.
we're not always aware of what our intuition is saying. And so we really need to just give it space and then listen to what it's saying. And then there's another part of that too, because if you've been betrayed, your gut can lie to you
Mm.
because sometimes it's basically, screaming from the past where it's some past trigger, nothing in the present. And sometimes it's talking about something that's currently going on. And so one of the things that I do in my marriage now is if I find myself kind of triggered about something or my intuition is like, ping, 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 something's going on here, I really sit with it for a bit before I say anything to my husband because I need to check in with myself and figure out where is this coming from. And not so much now, but earlier on in the marriage, it was amazing how much I could recognize, oh, this has nothing to do with him. This has nothing to do with the present. This is just past stuff. And that's really not his problem to deal with.
Mm.
That's me. That's my work to do. That's not his. But
Mm.
if instead I check in and it's like, no, this is really something now, okay, then it's something that I address.
Mhm. Wow, that's deep. I'm pausing for a moment because I'm thinking there are some decisions that I'm thinking about, because you also mentioned that saying that it's okay to mess up.
Yeah.
And now let's see, like, going about fixing it, because sometimes I can be like, okay, like, you messed up. I don't know if I should give you the time of day to fix
Right.
it, or if that was like a deal breaker. And then you said, like, of like not letting it compound. And as
Yeah.
you said that, I realized, oh my, I let something compound, and now I'm turning it into something big. And
Yeah.
then there's a lot of things that you're saying. I'm just like, oh my goodness. Yeah. I need to
And that's been such
time.
a learning curve for me because my like natural tendency is like, let it compound, don't say anything, and that's not good because then you're just letting things build,
Yeah.
but it's hard. And then, yeah, and then they build to a point where it is like a deal breaker.
Kind of linked to what you shared about how you've gone about rebuilding trust, and learning to trust yourself, your intuition, and giving yourself that time so you can be clear on what your body and in your inner knowledge is saying to you. There's also that idea of reconciliation and being able to heal. And although you've shared about the process of journaling, exercising, and setting goals, is there anything else you would add about going through that process of being able to reconcile all the events that happened, and how to fully heal, if you would say that you fully healed from this experience?
At this point, I think I have, knock on wood. But a few years ago, I was like, I'll never be fully healed. It's one of those, it's always a part of your story. It's not something that you're ever going to forget. It's something that changes you, but at the same time, it doesn't have to be something that always defines you. And I think
Mhm.
that's sort of the distinction. And at this point, it doesn't hold me back from anything. So I think, yeah, I think we'll go with healed. There were some big ideas there. One of them is before you can fully heal, you have to accept that it's over. That was one of the actually strange benefits of my situation is it was so sudden and so extreme. I mean, it was really like an amputation. So it was just done. So that piece for me, although it was very shocking and very hard to survive in that, early acute phase, it did mean that accepting it was over kind of happened automatically. You also, I think, have to be really careful as you're kind of processing everything, the stories that you start to tell yourself. So in the beginning, I was telling myself, I had the facts, but because he was gone, I had no information, no answers. And so I had to fill all of that in. And mine was extreme. But for all of us, we do that. We all tell ourselves stories about whatever it is that's going on in our lives. Somebody doesn't call you back, you have this reason why.
Yes.
It may not be true.
Yeah.
And
Especially not a good reason.
Exactly. Like we tend to go to like the worst or the most negative or the one that like fits in with how we see ourselves. And it's not always the right one. And so you have to be really careful the story you tell yourself. So when all this first happened to me, I started off seeing him as like this monster. I literally had this picture of him like sitting down in his basement office, like cackling, going, "Ooh, how can I get back at Lisa now?" And I saw everything that he did is so deliberate. And it really kind of made me feel like a victim, which in the beginning was kind of comfortable. It was like, oh, this was all done to me. But that's also a limiting place to be because if you're a victim, then you have no power. And I wanted my power back. So I started to sort of shift that story. Over time, I've created a story of what I think happened. And this is going back to his childhood and kind of filling in pieces, kind of connecting the dots really with what I know, and then filling in with what feels true to me. And it's one of those where it doesn't really matter if that's factual or not. It doesn't matter. But believing that, seeing those connections the way that I do has brought me peace. And it has allowed me to see what happened is sort of the natural outcome from a man that was hiding from himself and as a result was hurting others, not intentionally, but as collateral damage. Once that story kind of settled in me, and that took years, but once it settled in me, there was a huge release at that point of, okay, I see now how that all fits into the bigger picture. And I can let go of the anger that I had and the bitterness around how everything happened and how that was done. And then the other piece too is I think when something like this happens, we get so caught up in looking in the past. And sometimes the what ifs, sometimes the just, going through, ruminating on it, whatever, but that's where our energy is. And it makes sense. It's kind of like, remember when we were kids and you lost a tooth and your tongue constantly went to that like new opening?
Yes.
Same idea, right?
Yes.
It's like you have this new wound and you're just like fixated on it. Just like worrying at it. But the thing is that you're never going to be happy. You're never going to move on unless you're putting more energy into building the life that you want than you are in examining the past. And I think that's so important to do of putting your energy where you want to be. It's, we also learn, okay, you're from Canada, so this is going to make way more sense to you than it does to me living in Atlanta. But when it's icy and your car skids and you're supposed to steer, into the skid, it's kind of the same. Just, you need to like focus on where you want to be. That idea of like, you need to focus on where you want to be, not on where your fear ending up. Just go and focus where you're wanting to be. Sorry, another long answer.
Oh, they're welcome. They are welcome. It's all connected. So many good examples, like the tooth, the wound.
Yeah.
Oh yes, that. And
I mean, we all remember that, right? I mean,
yes. tasting the gum and like that weird feeling and all that. And
Yeah, it's just foreign and it's uncomfortable. And it's like we can't stop it. Like we're just so fixated on that because it's different and new. And yeah.
and then what you said as well about the need to be aware, to be able to heal. And this isn't going to be a spoiler alert, but like that idea of understanding that hurt people hurt others.
Yeah.
It's incredible when you can get to that point
Yeah.
and no longer just look from the vantage point of look at what this person did to me, and in that victim mindset, even though it was not beneficial. Well, maybe some benefits came out of that later,
Right.
but like to go through that is, and but then to like widen that vantage point to so many other things. Yeah.
Well, I remember I had a lot of anger. Like anger was kind of the strongest emotion that I had that
Mhm.
after the initial kind of devastation, the anger was what was the strongest. And a big piece of that was my ex-husband devastated me financially. And that was that piece that made it really difficult to, build a new life because I was paying for his debt. And I will never forget, it had been maybe 2 years, and I was dating my now husband. And I had just found out about another debt from my ex that I was going to have to pay. This was 2 years out, and I'm still having these things come in. And I was so angry and frustrated and felt like I was back to square one. And I pulled up at my then boyfriend's house, and he just looks at me and he could tell. Like he didn't know what was going on, but he just saw my face. He didn't say a word. He taped boxing gloves onto my hand, steered me over to the heavy bag that he had hanging in his garage, turned Metallica on full blast, and then went upstairs to the living room. I just hit that bag as hard as I could for probably 30 minutes, which is a long time on a heavy bag. Went upstairs, sweat dripping down my face, but, got that anger released. And he said to me, I understand why you're angry. Your anger is justified. However, if we are going to have a chance at a relationship ourselves, you need to address this anger. And it was like, oh, okay, that's powerful. And so that was kind of my like wake up call right then of like, oh, I got to deal with this. That's my responsibility to address that because, it's not whatever happens to us isn't our fault, whatever it is. How we handle it, how we respond, that's our responsibility. And I think sometimes those things are so difficult to separate. We want to say, but no, this was done to me. Therefore, I'm, and it's one of those like, however, your hurt, your anger, all of those things are so justified. But you don't have to stay there. And getting out of that is your piece. Because at some point, like whoever hurts us, they hurt us. And then we're the ones that are continuing to allow them to hurt us, either by not setting boundaries and keeping them in our lives in that same way, or by continuing to fixate on whatever it is that happened.
Yeah, we do have that. We do have that power to at least step in and change how we go forward after
Yeah.
dealing with that anger, but then like reaching that point of, are you going to continue to wither in this, or are you going to make some change, or just kind of
Exactly.
that makes sense. Yeah. As
Mhm.
much as much as sometimes you just want to stay there and be like, but this was so intense, this was so bad.
Oh, completely. Yeah, completely. I mean, it feels good sometimes to
Yes.
say, oh, this is so horrible. Look at what this person did to me. And that has its place. And and I think that's so important too. It's like before we can release that anger, whatever it is, we need to be heard. Because until we're heard and until those emotions are validated, it's hard for us to release them. Once they're heard and once somebody says, oh, you're hurt, you have a reason to be hurt, then it's like, I do. Okay, now I can let that go. Now I can release that.
I feel that. Lisa, I want to thank you so much for joining us on the show. I want to thank you so much. I've been fangirling, as I just told you, like just had a hard time like thinking straight with the questions just because I'm so amazed by you of your experience and that you shared it with us so open and honestly and how you've turned it around. I'm amazed by you and like just what you've shared. I'm absolutely amazed and I'm so grateful that you wanted to share your experience with us. So I really want to encourage readers to check out Lisa's book, amongst other things. But before we wrap up with our final question, I wanted to ask you about, since you've gone through one marriage and now in a second marriage, just curious about your perspective on the purpose of the institution of marriage and why you decided that you wanted to get married again.
So before I get into this, I just want to say that there's no one right answer for everybody on this. And even if you decide to get married, not every marriage looks the same. And there's no way that it's supposed to be. Make it what works for you. And I think that's so important because society kind of tells us that our lives need to follow kind of this cookie cutter pattern, and we think that marriage needs to look this one certain way, and it really doesn't. It's not about everybody else in your life, it's about you and the person that you're with. For me personally, I knew immediately that I wanted to be in a long-term committed relationship. I didn't know yet about marriage or not, but I just knew that that's what fits for me. That's what I wanted at some point. Marriage it's interesting. With my first husband, we got married kind of as like natural progression. It was the next step. We'd been dating for 6 years. We get along. Let's do that. It was just sort of, we never really thought about it, I guess. It's just, that's what you do. Whereas my second marriage was much more deliberate. It really was, what does this mean to me? What's interesting is like the first one to me, I kind of saw it as just a piece of paper. Like I didn't think it really changed anything, but it really does in a lot of ways. And I think sometimes we think that it's like this guarantee, like we talked about before, this certainty that like, oh, this person can't leave you or whatever. Well, we all know that's garbage. There's no guarantees that come with it. But there is something I think that it says about a level of commitment. And again, that's my personal perspective. It doesn't have to be that way. It's different for different people. And again, you make it look and work the way that you want for you, whatever that might be. I have friends that married in their 70s, and it's a third marriage for one, second for the other. And, they live apart for like 6 months out of the year, but it works beautifully for them. Awesome. I'm not one to judge and say, well, that's not how marriage should be, just because that's not what I want for mine. No, that works for them. And that's beautiful. And I think that's what's so important, is just that we figure out what's right for us and we listen to ourselves, not everybody else.
Thank you for sharing your perspective on that. And that disclaimer as well, that it's individual and based on what makes sense for you and who you're with. Our final question is, what are your top 3 or more resources that you would share for individuals who are going through divorce or considering divorce, and how to thrive after a divorce?
So I'm going to kind of break your rules here because I don't really have 3.
Okay.
And the reason that I don't have 3 is because it's really individual. But I do have kind of a caveat.
Okay.
In the beginning, when you're in those early stages, it's so easy to seek out resources that meet you in the place where you are. And what I mean by that would be like a discussion group or a support group or books or whatever that are just like, oh, this is horrible, this sucks, blah, 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 blah. And if you've experienced betrayal, just, all about cheaters, blah, all this kind of stuff. It's really easy to you can completely surround yourself with resources that will keep you in that space, and be careful there. They have their place, because in the beginning, you want to know that you're not alone. And so finding those resources let you know that, oh, I'm not alone in what happened to me. And I'm also not alone in my response to it, because it's really important to know that you're not crazy because we all feel like it in those early stages. But you don't want to stay there, because that's going to keep you stuck. Now I'm going to take it to the other extreme. The other extreme is there's also resources out there, and these are mainly by your mental health professionals who are very well-meaning, but either have never been through this or haven't been through it in so long, and they're so detached because they're coming from that super professional standpoint that it reads as fake because you can't identify with it. And so you're just like, whatever, like it just doesn't sink in because you don't believe that they understand what you're going through. And so that's also not super useful, especially in the beginning. Later on, when you're a little more, when you have more perspective, some of that can be quite helpful, but in those early stages, not so much. So what I recommend is finding resources that both will meet you where you are, but also give you that motivation and inspiration for where you want to be. So it's sort of that span of that whole experience. And then one specific recommendation I'm going to give, and this is actually going to sound like a strange one, but Twitter is actually a really good space to find other people that are going through something similar. And you have to be careful, obviously, because you want to make sure you're connecting with the right people, because there's a lot that are just going to be in those early stages, just the complaining part. But there really are some amazing communities there, and will connect you with like up to the date resources that might help.
That's awesome, especially with that advice, which also supports what you've shared before as well, of not getting stuck and honoring what you're going through, but also allowing you to go through stages instead of just sticking or staying too long at one and not challenging yourself to go beyond that. Thank you so very much, Lisa. And how can our listeners connect with you further to share your work and to share your book and to just connect with you?
Sure. Well, the easiest way is just type either my name, Lisa Arends, Arends, into Google, or Lessons from the End of a Marriage, and it'll throw up all kinds of stuff. But you can also find me in my blog, Lessons from the End of a Marriage, and on my YouTube channel, which is under my name.
Awesome. Thank you. And I will post all that information in the show notes so that you can go visit Lisa, connect with her, and share her book and just share all the resources that she's sharing with us. Thank you again, Lisa.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
And Freedom Finders, remember to honor your time and honor your energy, and talk to you next time.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Teach Me Freedom podcast. We hope you enjoyed it and found it beneficial. Feel free to reach out to us at teachmefreedom2020@gmail.com. And if you haven't done so yet, subscribe to the show on your favorite platform for streaming content. Feel free to comment and leave a 4 or 5 star review if you feel so inclined. Connect with you next time.